35mm f2, should you buy this lens? What's happening, YouTubers, and thank you for coming back to the channel today. And it's a lens discussion topic once again, and we are discussing the 35mm f2. So I have the silver version, and the reason I purchased the silver version was for it to go on my graphite XT2, and I'll pop that on after just to show you what it looks like with the graphite XT2. As usual, this discussion is my personal opinion. I will be talking about the pros, the cons, and then just to summarize if it's worth you buying this lens, or was it worth me buying this lens myself. I'm going to get right into it now, and I'm going to start off with the pros for the 35 f2. The first thing that you will notice is this thing is built absolutely brilliantly, in class with all the smaller f2s like the 50mm and the 23mm. It is of all metal construction. The only plastic parts of this lens are the front and rear lens caps, along with this plastic lens hood. The actual focusing ring turns very, very smoothly. There is a nice dampness to the actual focus ring, and it's not really loose. In fact, it just feels really, really nice to spin that around. The actual aperture ring is a really nice click aperture ring, and it ranges from f2 to f16. Image quality of the lens. So I find the image quality very, very good. It's, I would say, on par with the 23mm f2. I find corner to corner sharpness at f5.6 and f8 simply amazing, but then you do tend to get that with most lenses anyway. At f2, this lens is very, very good as well, especially in the middle, and even towards the edges I don't find any real major concerns, and I'm happy to shoot it at f2. To be honest, if you're going to buy an f2 version or an f2 lens, you know, unless you want to do a lot of street photography and stuff like that, you'll probably find yourself shooting quite a lot at the lower end of the scale, just to allow you to gather a lot more lights. Another pro about this lens is the autofocus. So the autofocus is better than most of the first generation Fuji lenses, and it is absolutely silent, very quiet. I mean, I can't hear it focusing whatsoever. There's a very tiny whir, but other than that, it's absolutely fantastic in terms of the sound of the focusing. It's lightweight, it only weighs 170 grams, and although it feels like a tank, and I mean it is a really well solidly built lens, it doesn't feel brittle at all, and the 170 grams is amazingly light for a solid lens like this. Another pro is you can achieve nice depth of field at f2, especially if you are shooting quite close to your subject and you have the background quite far behind. So you can achieve a nice depth of field with this lens, and you get some really nice out of focus areas. They're quite smooth, I don't find them busy, and I would say I'm quite impressed with the depth of field with the 35mm f2. It's a weather resistant lens, so you have the tiny gasket which goes around the lens here. So if you add that to a weather sealed camera like the X-T1, X Pro 2 or X-T2, then you have a fully weather sealed camera. And as always, weather sealing is subject to debate. and it is down to your risk if you choose to use it in a downpour or a light storm or light drizzle. I think I've explained before, it doesn't really bother me, and providing it's not bucking it down, I tend to use my gear in drizzle or light rain. What are the cons of this lens? So I was trying to think of the cons of this lens, and there actually isn't a lot. There's a few cons, however. The first con is, and I think it's a con, is this plastic lens hood. I hate it. I really hate it. I don't like it whatsoever, and simply because I don't like it, as soon as I bought this lens, I purchased a bigger, better lens hood like that. I think the lens, sorry, looks a lot more stylish, a lot more vintage, and a lot more retro. And the lens cap still fits in there absolutely fine. That's one con. The second con, so we talked about the autofocus on this lens, and it is good, but it's not as quick as a 23mm f2, which I happen to have here with me as well. So it definitely is quicker than the first generation lenses, but the 23mm is snappier. And you definitely notice it when you put it on any of the newer generation cameras, things like the X-T2 and the X Pro 2. And that's a bit of a shame, but wider angle lenses do tend to focus a little bit faster. I don't know if that is the reason. I'm not a lens designer. I'm not going to pretend to know, but I can tell you for sure that the 23mm is faster than the 35mm. Is it a deal breaker? Definitely not. Autofocus is fast enough on it, but just not as snappy as the 23mm f2. Also, let's talk about specs. It ranges from f2 up to f16. It's a 43mm filter thread. I'm not sure if you can see that there. So filters are cheap enough to come by, and actually talking about filters, I just want to give you a little tip. For these little lenses, I buy these Fujiyama lens filters or lens protectors. So it's an actual UV filter, and it protects your lens and controls UV light. And the reason I bought this particular filter was it was the only one that I could actually find in silver, and it actually is virtually exactly the same colour silver as the lens. You can see that there. And I think this filter only cost me about £15. I'll put a link in the actual video just to see if you buy a silver lens. I think they do them in black actually as well, but they are really good little filters, and not too expensive. They did a job. I don't find they did cause the image to be any softer whatsoever. I have done a few tests, and what I see from the lens with and without the filter is exactly the same. It has 9 elements in 6 groups and 2 aspherical elements. It gives you a 44.2 degree angle of view. It's a 35mm in crop terms. However, in full frame terms, it actually gives you a 53mm. This is what the lens looks like on the X-T2 in graphite. I have done a previous video comparing the different colour lenses with this camera. I'll put a link in the corner up here, I believe. But it does complement the camera. I think the camera looks really nice in the graphite with actually the silver combination. I really don't like this lens hood, so if I just take that off a moment and go back to my preferred lens hood, I find this hood does give you a little bit more shade as well. It's a little bit wider, and I think that looks so much better. there you go. That was it with the X-T2. Sets off the camera beautifully. Still love my X-T2, and I think if you're going to get a graphite version, get the silver. I think it looks really, really nice. If you get the black version, I would probably stick with the black 35mm. So, should you buy the 35mm f2? I've been asking myself the same question recently. As you all know, people that watch my channel, when I do my street shooting, I prefer the 23mm. I just prefer that slightly wider angle of view. I prefer that you have a little bit more space to crop in if you need to crop in. However, the 35mm, which is the 50mm or 53mm in full frame terms, I just find it a little bit tight. Also, I don't really use this lens that much. I have used it a little bit on the street, but I do find it a little bit tight. I really use this lens more for close-up kind of detail shots when I'm doing weddings and events. I also use it a little bit for kind of close or not too close portrait sort of shots at events, if I want to get a little bit of the background in. But I really don't use it that much, and the autofocus side of things doesn't really bother me that much. So I'm seriously contemplating on maybe either selling this or keeping it and buying the Mitacon 35mm f/0.95. And the only real reason I'm thinking about buying that lens and maybe passing this on, or I might keep it, I'm not too sure yet, is purely because when I'm doing detail shots or environmental stroke portraits, I do like to get that more depth of field. For the street, it doesn't matter. You're not going to shoot f/0.95, or very rarely will you shoot at f2. I mean, I don't. On the street, I shoot at f5.6 mainly, or f8, just so I have everything in focus. So I'm thinking I may well pass this on, but that doesn't mean it's not a good lens. It's just for what I use it for and what I need it for. It's kind of a little bit irrelevant for me. I would rather go for the Mitacon just because I get that shallower depth of field, and it'll work better for me for my weddings and events. But the important question is, should you buy this lens? That's a tricky question, because it depends what you're going to use the lens for. If you want a small lens on your camera and you want it for a little bit of everything, I would still say go for the 23mm f2. If you want a lens that you want to shoot your kids, for instance, or portrait style shots, then of course the 35mm will be better for you, and it's easier to achieve a nicer depth of field because it's that slightly longer focal length versus a 23mm. It's quite difficult to get a shallow depth of field with the 23mm. It's not impossible, of course you can do it, but the 35mm is easier for that. So, how would I rate this lens? I think this lens is definitely worth a buy, but I wouldn't say you should definitely get this lens. I think if you have the 23mm and maybe the 50mm, which gives you roughly a 75mm in terms of full frame, and you want to have all the focal lengths because you don't do zooms, then of course this will go nicely within your kit. So I hope that was of any help to you. Please continue to subscribe, like the video if you liked it, and I will catch you guys real soon on the next one. Cheers, bye. Is it a deal breaker? No. I think the focus speed on this is accurate and quick enough, but sometimes you can never have autofocus. Is it a deal breaker? No, not at all. But sometimes I think you cannot have Is it a deal breaker? Definitely not. Autofocus. What is wrong with me today, for fuck's sake?